Imagine Keanu Reeves walking into a room, only to be dismissed by someone who doesn't realize they're facing the very owner of the establishment. The tension in that moment reveals deeper lessons about humility, respect, and true class. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments below, and be sure to hit subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Welcome to Motivation for Success, the channel dedicated to uncovering real-life lessons that can transform your perspective. We love hearing your thoughts, so don't hesitate to post your experiences and insights. Now, let's dive into this compelling encounter and discover what it teaches us about overcoming judgment and embracing genuine respect. It was a buzzing Saturday evening in the heart of Rivercrest, a modern city known for its towering skyscrapers, fashion-forward citizens, and a nightlife that dazzled tourists and locals alike. On one of the most elegant downtown streets stood a renowned dining establishment, the Crescent Palms. With its high archways, cascading silver chandeliers, and polished oak floors, it was the kind of place that embodied opulence the moment you walked through the doors. Patrons for the evening included an eclectic mix of corporate executives, social media influencers, and affluent couples celebrating anniversaries or birthdays. Even from the entrance, the hum of vibrant conversation, the clink of expensive cutlery on bone china, and the faint notes of a live piano combined to create an atmosphere as luxurious as it was exclusive. Near the back wall of the Crescent Palms, where a softly lit corner table stood, sat a man dressed in a simple black t-shirt and well-worn jeans. His posture was relaxed yet self-assured, as though he was entirely at home in this upscale setting despite his casual attire. When people in suits and designer dresses brushed past him, they occasionally glanced sideways, puzzled by the presence of someone who didn't quite blend in. This man was Keanu Reeves, beloved actor, known worldwide, yet so often celebrated for his humble spirit rather than his fame. Strangely enough, no one recognized him. Perhaps it was because this particular restaurant had recently acquired a new clientele who were more interested in flaunting wealth than appreciating the subtleties of celebrity. Or maybe it was just that Keanu seemed to blend into any environment he found himself in, carrying himself with an understated grace. Standing off to one side was Annalise, a newly hired waitress at the Crescent Palms. She was tasked with upholding the restaurant's exclusive reputation and had taken it upon herself to ensure every detail was perfect. Her dark hair was pinned into a neat bun, and her crisp uniform fit flawlessly, symbols of her meticulous nature. Over the last hour, Annalise had been keeping one eye on Keanu, perplexed by his attire. She wasn't sure how he had slipped past the host. Everyone else that night appeared to be wearing finely tailored suits, silk dresses, or at the very least, smart business casual. Even the handful of social media influencers wore matching ensembles that gleamed under the subtle lighting. But there he was, unbothered, wearing jeans and sipping a solitary glass of bourbon. She walked to the stainless steel station at the far side of the dining room to refill a pitcher of water. There, she met eyes with Jonas, a busboy in his early 20s who had dreams of becoming a chef someday. Jonas recognized Keanu Reeves the moment he saw him. He had grown up watching his movies with his entire family. However, Jonas was a quieter soul, and the Crescent Palms was his first real job in the city, so he hesitated to say anything. Jonas watched as Annalise's gaze kept drifting back to that corner table, her lips pursed in mild disapproval. He felt a growing unease, suspecting she might approach Keanu and say something she'd regret. Annalise couldn't stand it any longer. She smoothed the front of her uniform, squared her shoulders, and decided it was time to address what she perceived as a breach of the restaurant's unwritten dress code. The clicks of her polished heels against the oak floor resonated through the space, catching the attention of a few diners who looked up from their menus. Keanu Reeves glanced upward just as Annalise arrived. Up close, her expression was polite but touched with an air of condescension. "Good evening, sir," she began, offering a professionally practiced smile. "I hope you're enjoying your visit to the Crescent Palms tonight." Keanu smiled in return, a gentle sort of warmth touching his eyes. "It's been lovely so far," he replied. Annalise carefully scanned the table, noticing the single bourbon glass. I see you're savoring our house bourbon, but have you considered ordering an entree? Our head chef has crafted a truly exceptional menu this weekend. He raised his glass and took a small sip. I'm content with the bourbon for now. Her carefully painted red lips tightened into a firmer line. Of course. But we do have patrons who've made reservations for these tables, especially on a busy Saturday night like this. If you're not dining, might you prefer the bar area? It's quite comfortable, and it's just down that corridor to the right. There was a hush among some of the nearby tables. People noticed Annalise's pointed suggestion, although they didn't fully grasp the context. However, Gerald, the seasoned manager of the Crescent Palms, had wandered into earshot. He, too, was observing but decided to let the conversation play out before stepping in. Keanu met Annalise's gaze without hostility. I appreciate the recommendation, but I enjoy sitting here. Jonas, who was replenishing bread baskets 2 tables away, heard the sharp edge in Annalise's voice. He kept glancing over his shoulder, anxious and tempted to intervene. Annalise cleared her throat. Sir, you understand that this is an upscale establishment. People typically come here expecting a certain ambience. We have a dress code, and while it's not strictly formal, we do expect guests to align with our standards. Keanu placed his glass down gently, the soft clink echoing in the momentary silence. I've been here many times, he said. And I've always found the atmosphere quite welcoming. His calm composure seemed to heighten Annalise's frustration. She cast a glance over to a group of well-dressed corporate types just arriving at the host stand. As you can see, these tables are in high demand by guests who typically order dinner, wine, or multiple courses. You could be more comfortable at the bar, where people can enjoy just drinks. It's not that I'm asking you to leave, it's just that. Keanu tilted his head slightly. You don't think I belong here in my jeans and t-shirt? She paused, caught off guard by the directness of his question. I'm merely suggesting that some areas of the restaurant are more appropriate depending on how you choose to dine. Jonas mustered courage and approached the two, carefully balancing a tray of fresh bread. In a quiet voice, he spoke up, Annalise, maybe it's alright if he wants to stay. There's an empty table near the bar for the executives if they need it. She shot him a cutting look. Jonas, this doesn't concern you right now. Go ahead and serve the bread. By this time, Keanu noticed the tension building. He offered Jonas a kind smile, almost a silent way of saying, thank you for speaking up. Then he turned back to Annalise, who was standing rigidly, as though she had staked her reputation on upholding the image of the Crescent Palms. I understand your perspective, he said gently. But do you think how someone dresses always reflects how much they can contribute to a place like this? A flicker of confusion passed through her eyes. She had expected an argument, or at least an indignant rebuttal, but Keanu gave her none of that. Instead, his demeanor remained calm, and his question hung in the air like a moral test she wasn't prepared for. Still, she couldn't let it go. I just want to make sure the restaurant keeps its standards. People come here for an experience, the ambience, the exclusivity, the high-quality service. And, well, appearances do matter. Across the room, Elaine and Walter, an older couple celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, watched the scene unfold. They had been patrons of the Crescent Palms for decades, back when it had simpler decor and a more casual vibe. Elaine grabbed Walter's arm gently, and they exchanged a worried glance. They'd seen Keanu a few times before, always seated in that same corner. They liked him, he was soft-spoken, gracious, never one to complain. They were also among the few who recognized him, but he had never drawn attention to himself. Gerald, the manager, began weaving through the tables, sensing that things were escalating. He could see guests turning their heads, wondering what was unfolding between the casually dressed man and the clearly agitated waitress. Annalise straightened her shoulders, deciding to take a more assertive stance. "Would you care to see the menu, sir?" she asked, an undertone of challenge slipping into her voice. "I can explain the courses in detail," slowly, she added, enunciating the last word deliberately, as though speaking to someone who couldn't possibly understand. A shocked silence fell around the immediate area. Jonas nearly dropped his tray of bread. Elaine put a hand over her mouth, while Walter shook his head in disapproval. Even some of the visiting executives paused their conversation to see what would happen next. Keanu's expression remained neutral, but there was a certain gravity in his eyes now. Slowly, he exhaled. "You must really believe I can't afford it," he said, an undercurrent of sadness in his voice. Annalise blinked. "I'm not saying that, sir. I'm simply—" He cut her off gently. "I come here often. Every week, in fact. It's become something of a tradition for me, one of the few places where I can sit quietly after a long week of work." She hesitated, her train of thought momentarily derailed. She had made a bad assumption that this was his first time. "I wasn't aware." "No," Keanu said, "you weren't. You saw me dressed casually and assumed I don't fit in. But maybe, just maybe, there's more to people than what they wear." Before Annalise could respond, Gerald arrived at the table, silently indicating that he needed to speak. Jonas hovered nearby, torn between wanting to help and worrying that any further interference might get him reprimanded. "Is there a problem, Annalise?" Gerald asked, though he more or less knew the answer. She opened her mouth but seemed unsure of how to explain. Her face was already turning red in embarrassment. I was just making sure we seat people appropriately." Gerald nodded, his demeanor calm but laced with tension. "I see. Well, I think our guest here can decide what's appropriate for himself." Keanu turned to Gerald and gave him a friendly nod. "Good to see you again, Gerald." Gerald's eyes softened with recognition. "Likewise," he said, knowing well who Keanu was. Now that the manager was here, Annalise seemed uncertain of her footing. She decided to pivot. "I was only trying to maintain the Crescent Palms high standard. We cater to a certain clientele, and he—" Gerald raised a hand gently to halt her. "Annalise, there's something you should know about Mr. Reeves." But Keanu stepped in before Gerald could continue. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone, tapping through a few screens. "Bryce, could you come over here?" he called across the room. From a quieter corner near the bar appeared Bryce, the restaurant's accountant, carrying a slim briefcase. Annalise stared, bewildered. Bryce approached, opened the briefcase, and removed a set of documents with gold-embossed lettering. With utmost calm, Keanu placed the documents on the table. He turned them so Annalise could read. At the top, it read, "Ownership documents of the Crescent Palms." A stunned hush enveloped the area. Even the live piano music seemed to fade as more people realized what was happening. The color drained from Annalise's face, replaced by wide-eyed shock. You own this place," she managed, barely above a whisper. Keanu nodded. "I bought the Crescent Palms not too long ago because I loved its legacy. For over 50 years, it stood as a beacon of hospitality in Rivercrest. I wanted to preserve that legacy. The last thing I wanted was to parade my ownership around. I just wanted a place where people could feel at home, no matter who they were or how they dressed." Annalise's posture slackened. She seemed smaller now, realizing her entire premise had been shattered. Jonas watched from the side, relief washing over him. Elaine and Walter shared a satisfied nod. Perhaps now the Crescent Palms would be reminded of its original ethos. Gerald cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves has visited quietly for months, Annalise. He never made a fuss, never demanded special treatment. In fact, he specifically asked us not to treat him any differently from other customers." Keanu directed his gaze at Annalise. Please, understand, I don't come here to flaunt anything. I come because I value what this place stood for: hospitality, good food, and genuine service. Not snobbishness or judgments about someone's wallet based on what they're wearing. Tears welled up in Annalise's eyes. She felt humiliation, regret, and shame all at once. She stammered, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Keanu nodded sympathetically. I believe you. But this is also an important lesson. True class isn't about outward appearances. It's about how we treat one another. Jonas, feeling bolder, stepped forward. Mr. Reeves, I just wanted to say I'm a big fan, and I really admire how kind you've been about all this. Some people wouldn't be so gracious. Keanu turned to him, smiling. Thank you, Jonas. I appreciate that. And since you're here, he looked over at Gerald. We need more staff who genuinely care about the experience of others. People with a heart for service. Gerald gave a nod. Indeed, we do. We're always looking for employees who can uphold that warmth and sincerity. Keanu tapped the table thoughtfully. Jonas, would you be interested in training as a waiter? It might be a step toward your dream, whatever that may be. For a moment, Jonas looked as though he might drop his tray in disbelief. Why yes, absolutely. I've always dreamed of learning more about the culinary world and front-of-house service. Keanu nodded. Let's make it happen. Talk to Gerald tomorrow. We'll get you into a training program so you can learn all the aspects of the restaurant business. A bright grin spread across Jonas's face. Thank you, sir. This means more than you know. All eyes shifted back to Annalise, who was trembling slightly from the adrenaline and the embarrassment. She cast her gaze downward. Mr. Reeves, I truly apologize. I was so focused on the restaurant's image that I forgot what hospitality really means. Keanu studied her for a moment, seeing her genuine remorse. You have passion, Annalise. That's clear. But you also have a choice now. You can stay and learn what real service is, how to treat people with dignity regardless of appearances, or you can find another place that values pretension more than people. Her lip quivered. I would like to stay. If you'll let me. I promise I'll do better. Gerald placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We all make mistakes, Annalise. But what matters is what we learn from them. A slow but steady applause began from Elaine and Walter's table. Then the applause spread, table by table, as patrons realized they had just witnessed something profound, a lesson that cut across social strata and redefined what it meant to be truly refined. The restaurant's pianist, sensing the tension lift, began to play a gentle, uplifting tune. Soft chatter resumed among the diners, many of whom were smiling at the turn of events. The crescent palms felt different in that moment, as though a genuine warmth had replaced the earlier veneer of exclusivity. Jonas, beaming, went back to work with renewed energy, anticipating his new future. Gerald stepped aside to handle managerial tasks, but he carried a proud, almost fatherly smile on his face. Elaine and Walter lifted their wine glasses to toast the moment. Keanu leaned back in his chair, sipping the last of his bourbon. He closed his eyes briefly, as though savoring not just the taste of the drink, but also the soft murmurs of guests, the tinkling piano, and the essence of a place he'd come to love. Before Annalise returned to her duties, she mustered the courage to speak to Keanu one last time. I really did think I was protecting the restaurant's reputation. I see now that I got it all wrong. He offered a compassionate nod. It's all right. Growth comes from moments like this. Just remember, true excellence in service goes beyond fine dining. It's about empathy, respect, and a genuine desire to make someone feel welcomed. Her eyes shone with gratitude. Thank you. I won't forget it. She discreetly excused herself to help another table, determined to prove that she understood the lesson. The night wore on, and as dessert orders rolled in, a calm tranquility settled over the Crescent Palms. People chatted about what they had just witnessed, some sharing their own stories of being judged or judging others prematurely. The entire restaurant seemed to buzz with a collective sense of introspection. One influencer at a table near the main window whispered to her cameraman, "We came to record a fancy dinner, but we got something way better, a real story about humility." Across the room, a group of business executives, who typically only talked about profit margins, now discussed how important it was to cultivate mutual respect within their teams. At precisely 10 p.m., as the last main courses were served, Keanu stood up to leave. He caught Gerald's eye and signaled that he was heading out. On his way, he gently tapped Jonas on the shoulder, wishing him luck. He nodded once more to Annalise, who met his gaze with a look of firm resolve. Gerald walked him to the door. "Thank you for your patience tonight, Mr. Reeves," Gerald said softly. "I'm sorry about the misunderstanding." Keanu gave a small shrug. "No harm done. Sometimes these moments are necessary reminders." It might be just what the Crescent Palms needed to keep its tradition of genuine hospitality alive. They shook hands, and Keanu stepped out into the cool Rivercrest night. The sounds of distant car horns and the glow of city lights greeted him, contrasting with the gentle hush of the restaurant he left behind. Inside the Crescent Palms, conversation slowly returned to normal, but an undercurrent of new awareness flowed through the staff and guests alike. Annalise felt lighter, though she remained humbled by the experience. Jonas was already daydreaming about the chance to move up in the restaurant business. Gerald looked out across the dining room and smiled, sensing that tonight had shifted something important in how they all approached their work. Over by Elaine and Walter, a small crowd had gathered. They were discussing the essence of the evening. "It's not about what's on the outside," Elaine said, gently tapping the table. "Kindness, respect, and humility, that's what really matters." Walter nodded and raised his glass. "Here, here," he said warmly, and the group laughed softly in agreement. So, what did we learn from tonight's story at the Crescent Palms? If there's one undeniable truth, it's this: genuine class and success aren't measured by expensive clothes or glittering appearances. They're revealed by how we treat the people around us, whether they're friends, strangers, or someone we assume can't possibly belong. And sometimes, the very person you might be tempted to judge could turn out to be the one holding all the cards. In this case, it was Keanu Reeves, a man whose global fame is matched only by his modesty. By choosing kindness, even when faced with disrespect, he taught an entire room of people an unforgettable lesson in humility. Here at Motivation for Success, we believe that a single interaction can change someone's life trajectory, whether it's an aspiring busboy who gets a shot at his dream job or a waitress who learns the true essence of hospitality. Remember, you never know who you're talking to, and more importantly, you never know the impact a simple act of respect or kindness can have. Have you ever been unfairly judged? Or perhaps you've judged someone too quickly? Share your story in the comments below. Let's learn from each other's experiences. If you found this story meaningful, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to Motivation for Success. We share real-life lessons and inspiring stories that just might give you a fresh perspective on life and success. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, remember, treat every stranger with kindness, because true success isn't about looking good, it's about doing good.